Today, I'm sitting down with Nate from WASD20. His channel covers a wide variety of Dungeons and Dragons content, everything from creating maps to reviewing both official and third-party content. Nate has it covered. Today, we talk about his love of creating maps for fantasy and specifically for Dungeons and Dragons, as well as how he finds good products to use in his D&D games, what to look for and what to look out for. Without further ado, sit back and relax. You're listening to Roll for Insight. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Roll for Insight. Nate from WASD20, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we have a tradition here on Roll for Insight. We always ask this question at the beginning of every episode. Nate, I gotta know, what is your D&D pet peeve? It's not something that's gonna break up a friendship or a group, but it's just something that makes you go, ugh, why'd you do that?
Oh, man. I would say probably when it is very clear that a player, when it's their turn, has not thought about what they're going to do on their turn at all. They're figuring it out right then. It's like, it's your turn. And they're like, oh, yeah, like I take turns. I forgot. Let me look at my character sheet for 3 minutes.
It's so frustrating, too, because you have like a full 5 to 10 minutes to get that sorted out before you have to go. Like, there's 5 players you got to buffer between you and the enemy.
Yeah. So most of my players aren't bad with that. And but I've played in some games, too, where I'm a player. And it's like, I really try to think about this beforehand. And I wish everyone would.
Especially since, one thing that I hear constantly, a video came out 2 weeks ago that got 200,000 views on how to make D&D combat less sluggish. And there's a lot of things the DM can do, but I think one of the number one components of making a D&D combat sluggish is players not remembering that they have a turn and taking 3 minutes. Do you? I'm curious. Do you enforce a time limit on your players? All right, you got 10 seconds. You gotta come up with what you're doing, or we're skipping you. Do you do that?
Nope, I've never done that. It's something I've considered, but I think what I have done actually is this, where I've said, it seems like you're not quite ready yet. I'm going to go ahead to the next player, and we'll come back to you as soon as that player's done.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm ordering an hourglass, so we're gonna see how it shakes out.
Yeah, it could work.
But we've talked about, this is just a player pet peeve, a thing that's with parties, but you review a lot of products for Dungeons and Dragons, whether they be official products or third-party stuff, and we'll talk more about that later. But, we have seen recently that Wizards of the Coast, they've announced the next evolution of D&D. It's very vague, but we don't really know what that means. It's probably something like 5.5. That's what everyone's talking about. And so everyone's putting out their wish list, what they want for the next evolution of Dungeons and Dragons. And it's been a subject on this show. A lot of people have said so many things about, getting rid of combat and player whack-a-mole, where they get up and get back down, talking about attacks of opportunity, stuff like that. So for you, what are some things that you want Wizards of the Coast to do with their next iteration of Dungeons and Dragons? What's your wish list?
Yeah. So I would love to see just straight out of the box more character options. I think that would be one where we don't need. Now they have lots of character options, right? But it would be nice to see those compiled in one book better. So that's definitely a big one. It's just more character options. I think that's one of the bigger complaints about 5e is that, it's just harder to build a character that really feels unique with the stock options. So there's one. I honestly, I'm not a super in the rules sort of person. And I just kind of go with the flow. And I don't have a super critical eye to rules and iterations and how they affect. And I'm also, 5th edition is my first edition of D&D.
Same here.
I'm fairly recent. So, I also don't have a ton to compare it to in terms of nostalgia for things in other editions. I played Pathfinder, but yeah. So I don't honestly have a ton. Another thing I would like to see is a Dark Sun setting book. I think that would be cool for the next edition or 5th edition. I'd take it.
You said that you played Pathfinder, and a lot of people have seen Pathfinder and carried over elements from that game and homebrewed them into their D&D games. Is there anything that you think that you would put from Pathfinder into Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, or do you just not want to try to mess around with the house rules?
No, I don't mess around too much with house rules. I do enjoy some homebrew stuff, like, I like to make criticals a little more impactful, critical hits and stuff. I like to, I don't know. There's little things like that. But the big thing that I really like about Pathfinder, honestly, is some of their adventure paths. So I have really considered running. I've got the huge Rise of the Rune Lords book on my shelf, and I started running that in Pathfinder back in the day. And I have definitely considered, even like in the last month, I've considered running Rise of the Rune Lords in 5th edition and getting that going, because I love that book, man. It's so good.
Yeah, I mean, you have talked about. I was watching your map video where you're going through all of your old maps, and I was shocked by how many worlds you've worked in and created, and how many of these adventures that you have worked through yourself. So I am curious, like for you, when you're looking through and creating an adventure, like what's some elements that you always make sure to include? Like when you're running a game or prepping for what you're going to show your players, like what's some stuff that you're like, yes, I need this in here?
Oh man, I gotta have some characters I can do a weird voice with. That's just one of the fun things about D&D for me, is just getting into crazy characters and making my players laugh, or just kind of immersing them and reminding them that, hey, no, this is not Nate. You're not dealing with Nate here. You're dealing with Elias Stormdiver, or whoever it is. And, just having fun with that. So that's a big one for me, is just crazy characters, memorable NPCs, memorable monsters, whatever it is. And then the other thing is probably, I like to build in some ambiguity. I like to build in things that allow my players to surprise me. So sometimes that's an encounter that this could be, depending on how the players view it, it could be a hostile encounter, or it could be a friendly encounter. And I like to build in some of that ambiguity to keep myself interested in the game, because if I always can predict what's going to happen, it's not as fun for me.
So you mentioned that some of your encounters are not combat based, and a lot of DMs struggle with that, like creating an encounter where the players need to solve a problem, but the problem does not involve hitting something until it falls and dies. So a lot of DMs struggle with creating encounters that are more peaceful. How do you manage an encounter where players need to talk their way through a problem? Like how do you make sure to keep an interesting, peaceful encounter?
Yeah, I think that, well, first off, I don't try to keep it peaceful. I think you have to know your players' tendencies. And so if your players do have the tendency of being murder hobos and rushing into a fight, then sure, I think that's a worthy goal to how can I work in, how can I teach my players in a way? In a way, a DM is a teacher, I think. How can I teach my players that hitting stuff is not always the best solution? That's one way to look at it. But in general, my players, I was about to say my players are pretty balanced with it. No, my current group, yeah, they do hit stuff a lot. So I think building in some encounters that are incredibly difficult, I think is one way to do that. That just there's no chance. They'll have no chance. They'll be captured. I don't always like I'm going to build an encounter that will kill them necessarily, because that can be a campaign ender sometimes. But can you think of, if your players are inclined toward the murder hobo, can you think of a way that they can learn that lesson? You can teach them as the DM that combat is not always the best solution. Now you're imprisoned. You'll have to find a way out. And even when you do find a way out, you're stripped of all your stuff. So that's one way to look at it. Maybe that's kind of a mean way.
Nah.
But also, I think just making encounters that have fun and likable characters is another way. No, I don't want to kill this person. I don't want to hit this person. When there's a likable character, but then kind of also playing with that, because showing that, hey, I've built this likable character for 2 sessions, and now you learn something about them that's ooh, they're not such a good person after all. Yeah. And kind of just, again, kind of playing with that ambiguity is so much fun for me. That kind of the gray areas of, there's not just good guys and bad guys here.
So you mentioned that if your party lose the fight, they are imprisoned. So do you have multiple ways of solving the TPK problem? Because you don't want to kill everybody. That's not usually the DM's goal unless you're doing some kind of hardcore dungeon crawler. So do you have other solutions to, other than all right, you're all in jail now? Or do you just keep it to there and have that prison break session? Because, those are pretty fun.
I've done the prison break thing. I think I've actually only done that once. that I can think of. But other ideas, one is like being left for dead, right? You're unconscious, or maybe you're unconscious, maybe you have 1 hit point, whatever it is, but kind of like narrating that you're down and you're bleeding out, and the enemy says, "Oh, we killed them," or whatever, and then they walk away, and then some kindly stranger might come and, pour a little water down your throat. "Are you okay?" Whatever it is, and revive you and nurse you back to health in their cabin in the woods, or whatever it is, right? So I think that's another way to do it, is kind of being left for dead. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of any others, but I'm sure there are tons of other ways to avoid the TPK.
You're totally right about the left for dead thing, because so many people will say like, "Oh my God, that's so illogical that the bad guy would leave them there." But like, if I stab someone in the gut and they're bleeding out onto the ground, they're unconscious, they're not moving, like, I'm pretty sure they're gone.
There are all kinds of real world examples of people who like, "Oh, they're dead." And then my son was just telling me one the other day that he learned in history class or something, who's English, I don't remember. Anyway, he's in 7th grade and he came in with this gruesome story of some guy who got, like, I don't even remember what it was. Some projectile went through his head.
I know about that.
Like in his eye and like through his brain and out the back, and he survived and lived another 10 years for it or something.
Yeah, I when I was taking psychology in uni, we actually learned about that guy, because it took out an important part of his brain that was important to feeling some sort of thing. But yes, he did survive.
Okay.
So yeah,
well, there you go.
He is very important, because he did not die from that, and he actually lost some important brain functions, which is a fascinating case for study. But anyway, when you're reviewing, you've talked about a lot of different, like we said, you talk about a lot of different adventures and products for Dungeons and Dragons. Like, I saw a video where you were talking about character builders, like the best subscription services for 3D printers, stuff like that. When you are looking at D&D products, I mean, for a lot of people, they can't watch tons of videos reviewing all these products. So for you, how do you look at a product, and like, what do you look for that makes you go, "Yeah, this is worth my time. This is worth my money"? Like, just a catch-all thing that makes you go, "Yeah, this is worth looking into."
Yeah. That's a great question. I think, honestly, the main thing is just products that excite me. Products that I am genuinely interested in the first place. There are times when I will review something that's not as exciting to me just because it got sent to me. It's just like, "Oh, it's on my desk." Like, and I don't really have any other good video ideas for this week. So let's just talk about this thing. Cool.
All right, Dungeon Craft, you're up this week.
Yeah. So there has been some of that, but I feel like there's a lot less of that these days. Usually it's products that just genuinely excite me. And that does not necessarily mean my reviews are always positive, because there are products that genuinely excite me and then disappoint me too. But that's kind of it. I am very fickle and flying all over the place in my interests, and that it's hard to pin me down. So when people like look at my channel, sometimes I do kind of wonder, like, I've got a wide variety of stuff, and sometimes that probably holds me back a little bit. There's probably also people who enjoy the variety, and I have to follow what interests me. I can't bring myself to make a video that's just like, this sucks.
Yeah, getting burnt out is awful. Especially getting burnt out on D&D and YouTube. That just sucks.
Yep. So yeah, that's not a good feeling. I assume you've been there a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, it's happened. I've made like 90 RPG horror stories at this point. Like, yeah. It's so much. But I mean, yeah, you just have to handle that burnt out by varying up your content and just varying up like what you engage in, because if you get burnt out on something that you love doing, like, that just sucks. Just, it's the worst feeling.
Right. Like, people know me for map drawing videos, and for a while it was just like, I just don't feel like I have anything interesting to say about maps right now. Yeah, I'm doing some commissions, but like, I'm not really trying anything new. I don't really feel like I have anything new to share, so I'm not going to force it. So for like 6 months there, I didn't make any map videos, and people were like, "Come on!" But it's just like, I'm sorry, I got to follow my muse. I got to follow my very fickle and fleeting feelings in the moment.
Yeah, do what you love, man. But I mean, you mentioned earlier that not all of your reviews are positive, and that's only natural. I have to ask, is there something that you're always on the lookout for, like a thing, like a tell-all, like a red flag that makes you go, "Oh, maybe this is not worth my time, and more importantly, not worth my money"?
Oh man, I can't think of anything specifically. I mean, I read reviews, so if I'm looking at something on Amazon or on My Mini Factory or something like that, then yeah, those those can scare you away. And sometimes it's tempting, to like to get those products and do one of those like this thing sucks and with the thumbnail of like me thumbs down making a gross face, or like that would probably get
Bread
tons of views and do
everywhere.
really well. Yeah, exactly. But no, I have not done that yet. I haven't stooped to that low.
I don't know why, but I don't know if it's actually a thing, but red thumbnails, like they legitimately are my top videos, are thumbnails with like red elements or
Oh
odd
wow.
colors. I think that might be
Yeah.
a thing. It might be a thing.
It definitely could be a thing. Here's what I know is a thing. Thumbnails that show negative emotion.
Oh yeah.
Those will do so well. Any thumbnail that shows negative emotion, whether it's like disgusted face or thumbs down, or I mean, I've played that game a little bit, but I
RPG horror stories with like a passive thumbnail where people are like standing around or like a beautiful environment, those won't do well. But if I put like a battle in the thumbnail or some kind of like sad thing happening, then there you go. I always like them being
yep.
aesthetically pleasing though. I don't want to put like memes in my thumbnails. I want a cool art piece that I can link and show an artist some appreciation.
Totally. And I have done the series I can think of is my boring series. Your NPCs are boring. Your towns are boring. It's
Hey,
like,
sometimes they are, man. That's totally that was the case for my first few sessions.
yeah. So in that one, I just resigned myself. No, I'm just gonna be that jerk who's calling your stuff boring.
I mean, hey, like the truth is, sometimes that's what people are looking for. Like they're just like, I mean, I need to figure out why this is not working. Like my last session, like I said, I legit, this is the first time I've ever done this, but my last session, I sent out an apology to my players because I was like, dude, I was looking back on this game after listening to the recording, and man, I dropped the ball. This was not good. I'm sorry, guys. And they said like, oh no, we had fun, but I'm still like looking back on it, going like, what happened? What did I do here? So I'm still figuring it out, and hopefully I will by the next game. But yeah, sometimes you just gotta figure out what you did wrong because that's the only way you can improve.
No, totally. Yeah, that's super. Just a really good skill for a DM is to be reflective and to know your strengths and weaknesses, and to keep learning more strengths and weaknesses
Yeah.
as you go.
Especially
Yep.
since everyone is different, they've got all these different styles. I mean, for me, I mean, you mentioned that you don't really have like a tell all for like a product that you don't like, but for me, especially in D&D, I get really suspicious if they want like a heavy price for a subscription right up front. If that's the price that they're
Yeah.
pushing right there, I'm gonna get worried because if you want me to pay like $60 for the whole year rather than piecemeal over the months, I'm gonna
Yeah.
start going. This might not be worth it.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I used to be really like rag on the subscription models, but I'm starting to see the benefit a little bit more for sure. And I think one of the ways I saw that was actually the map making software Incarnate versus Wonderdraft. When Wonderdraft first came out, it was like, hey, it's the Incarnate killer. It looks better and it's a one-time purchase. And then over the next year or two, you just see Incarnate just getting better and better and better and better and better. And Wonderdraft is still down here like, oh, maybe those subscription dollars are actually going to improving this product.
Yeah, and
Um,
also like if I pay $60 for a product and I think I hate it after a week, I'm gonna be really missing that $15
oh man,
cancelable purchase.
you gotta have the monthly thing there. If it's only annual, that's an immediate thumbs down. If it's
If it's only
unless it's
annual, I'm
$5 a
worried.
year,
I'm worried.
yeah,
Because I was
be concerned.
this isn't D&D, but when I was writing sheet music for jazz, I remember MuseScore changed their subscription model. I don't know if they changed it back, but they changed their subscription model to be default annual, and that's when I was like, oh boy, something happened. And when I got in there, so much had changed. Maybe not for the better.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, you gotta watch out for that. The other thing, like with those subscription models, is just I don't know. I feel like some of them are just getting out the gate, and if you're, I feel like you almost need a demo, like a free demo version or something like that. Because if you're just starting and you have a high price subscription model, like that's just a death toll to me. Like, no, you're not going anywhere unless you have all the things right out the gate, which no one does.
No, absolutely not. By the way, I am curious because this is a program that I was hyped for, but kind of let me down a little bit. Did you ever use Sirenscape?
I have used Sirenscape a little bit, but my player actually runs it for me while we play now.
Nice.
Yeah.
I was let down by mostly their UI. I cannot do that while I'm playing D&D, while I'm running D&D. Like, I couldn't
Yeah.
do it. You're lucky you got a player,
Yeah.
man. That's great.
Oh man, it's great because he got to hook up. This is Michael from Dead Aussie Gamer, and he got to hook up with Sirenscape, like review copy or something. He's an influencer, I don't know. And so he just said, "Hey, I've got the module on here. I can run it." I said, "I will not say no to that." And so, it's got all the built-in sound effects for Rime of the Frost Maiden. So that's really nice.
See, I don't run modules, but I mean, if I was running Rime of the Frost Maiden, I would consider the sub and maybe giving it to like my player who's more savvy with that kind of, or who has more of an attention span. But like, I just could not look through that UI, man. It was too much.
There's already so much to manage when you're running D&D. When you can reduce something like that, that's helpful. If I didn't have Sirenscape, my normal method is Spotify playlists just for music. Got my battle playlist, got my travel playlist, got my dungeon playlist, About Town Tavern. I've got like 4 or 5 playlists.
Okay, I haven't talked about backgrounds and ambience in so long, since we had Momo on the show like 2 months ago. But I'm curious, what do you put in there? Because she has like music from specifically stuff that her and her players have not played, so they don't recognize anything. I put in stuff specifically so my players do recognize it, so that they can get hyped up, like Pirates of the Caribbean music during a pirate heist. So like, what do you put in there?
Yeah. So I don't really go for things my players have or haven't. I just kind of like went through some, honestly, mostly RPG video game soundtracks. The Witcher, Baldur's Gate, Dragon Age. I've got some Mass Effect in there even. I just got a bunch of stuff like that. I think I do have some movie soundtrack stuff. And some like just random kind of like new agey sort of like Eastern European bands that are just like, I've never heard of this band before, but they make some really mystic sounding crazy stuff.
I thank God for, there's a channel called Promethean Archival Mind. If I remember, I'll definitely put him in the cards. But he extracted music from Destiny and expanded it out to be like 20 minutes. And the great thing about video game soundtracks is that they're not supposed to be synced to anything, and they're supposed to be listened to over the course of a long period of time, so they're not too repetitive. So that's why I love those.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And often they're made to kind of flow into one another too, because combat can start and then it dies down and just the intensity of battles rises and falls, and they often auto adjust the music to fit that. So not that I'm doing that, but it does make the music kind of flow together sometimes really well.
I try to do that, and it does give me a headache. Worth it though, totally worth it. But I mean, like, one last thing, I mean, can you recommend, if you had to recommend like specific third-party products for Dungeons and Dragons? I was talking about this with the Azrai, but there's so many products out there, so much made for Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games in general, that just don't get the kind of attention that they deserve. So I mean, if you had to shout out anything and recommend anything to people, like, what would you say you should get?
Oh man, Hero Forge is one of my favorite things. And full disclosure, they are one of my sponsors, but I absolutely love their character builder, and it's just so fun it's like a toy. You just messing around with that and using it to build a character. Even if you never get one of their miniatures printed, which, I've got a few of those, but they are pricey. But when you get their just get in there and build for free, or you can get their monthly subscription for like $5 a month or something, or $7 a month, to be able to export PNGs of your characters, or make make little tokens of your characters. And it's just a lot of fun.
You, like you said earlier, you became big on YouTube for making maps in Dungeons and Dragons. You're a cartographer, man. You make maps for worlds, make maps for cities, you make battle maps. I mean, for starters, like, how'd you get into making maps for D&D, or just making maps in general for fantasy?
Yeah, so I got in by watching another YouTuber, actually, one called Questing Beast, and his name's Ben, and he makes really nice maps, and he just had some videos up of some maps that he made. And I got really interested in that, watching those. And then I decided I'm going to try it myself. So I turned on my webcam and started drawing a map, mostly following his advice. And it turned out pretty well, and people wanted to see more. And so I just kind of kept going. And after about 4 to 6 months, I would say, I started getting my first requests from people who wanted me to make them maps. So I made one for my DM at the time, Juice from Master the Game. And that was a good experience. And so then people started paying me to make them maps. And I just kind of kept going, never looked back.
Yeah, so you make commissions or do commissions for maps. And I am curious, I mean, you've been doing this for a long, long time, but, you know, even if you've been doing something for a while, there is stuff that's challenging. So for you, is there an element of map making that you just still haven't got down and you're still trying to learn, or something that makes you go, oh boy, that's going to take a while?
Yeah, there are definitely certain things that I just avoid. Like some of the abstract things like borders and compasses, honestly, are just insanely time consuming for me. I can't just bust out a good looking compass right away or a good looking border. Those are things that take time. I still do them and I enjoy them. And sometimes I'm really happy with the way they turn out, but they're not my strong suit. And there are a few other things like that where someone will say, like maybe in a map drawing stream, like, draw this. And it's like, nope, no, I will not draw that. I can't think of any specific examples off the top of my head, but everything I've had to learn has taken me time, with the exception of like, I think mountains, trees, some of the basic elements like that, those came naturally to me. But when someone wants like, I want a shipwreck on my map, it's like, oh boy, that's going to take some time. Or a dragon flying over. Like I can do those things and I've gotten better at them. But the first few were like very time consuming.
Okay, I gotta ask this. I mean, how do you see the evolution of your work as a map maker? Like, again, like I was looking at your original maps, and then I looked at some of your recent work. I mean, it's changed a lot. Is there anything that you think is going to stay the same forever, or something that you're really happy you improved on?
Want to stay the same forever, and I want to keep exploring new styles and mapping new things and different kinds of maps. But it does feel good to come back to certain things for sure. It's kind of like a homecoming sometimes when you've been doing one thing and you keep on evolving. And then you just revisit one of those original things that you drew. And it's like, oh man, this is so good. I remember this. There's that nostalgia, and you realize, and I've gotten better at it because I've been drawing more. Sometimes I'm a little rusty, but most of the time it's like, I can do this better than I used to. So things like just a mountain range are just, I don't know. There's something so satisfying about drawing a good mountain range. Yeah.
A lot of people are trying to get into maps, but again, like it took you a while to get good at this. It's hard to hand draw all of these locations for fantasy or sci-fi or whatever you're doing. So is there any mistake that you or not constantly see, but commonly see when people or you're looking through like Pinterest or whatever and seeing maps that people have drawn?
I think the mistakes that I usually see are more artistic in nature, and so it's hard to call them mistakes. There are things that I see drawn that I just think, oh man, your mountains, like mountains that are kind of tilted to the side a little bit. And it's just like, no, that just looks wrong. Things like that, or trees that are just drawn way too big, and your trees are like as big as your mountains, dude. Like, come on. And it's not wrong or right. It's just, I have my own particular artistic taste that sometimes when I'm looking at maps, things rub me the wrong way. I also don't love really heavily digital looking maps that are like hyper realistic. I can appreciate the artistry of that, and I have mad respect for those people. But I just never have had an interest in trying to do that myself. For me, it's always that hand-drawn style that kind of reminds me of the old Lord of the Rings map that I first saw when I was probably in 7th grade.
You know, actually, I think I might have. So my grandpa gave me like a 2nd edition copy of Lord of the Rings, and you showed a map from your original video that was a printout. I actually think I have that copy of the map in my Lord of the Rings book, which is right over there. But yeah,
that's awesome.
That
yeah,
map
and that one
so
was
cool.
That one was, I think, drawn by his son, Christopher Tolkien. And yeah, so good.
It's so good looking. I mean, man, I don't want to touch the book because it's falling apart and I don't want to ruin it because it's such a good looking map and it smells so good. I don't know how
Oh man, don't get me started on the smell of books. I've thought about doing a smell off with the books on my shelf and just like making a bracket, and we're gonna find out which RPG book smells the best.
Honestly, my DMG smells pretty good.
Yeah.
The DMG, My Lord of the Rings books probably win. At the bottom of the list, every David Weber book I have, no hate on him, but I don't know what is up with his books. They just do not smell good. But
Oh man, book smells. Yeah,
are
they're
interesting.
I love a good book smell.
Yeah, they're great. Now, you mentioned earlier highly digital looking maps. And obviously, we're specifically talking about making maps digitally, but I have to ask, does drawing maps by hand, by pencil, by pen, make it easier to make maps just in like a program such as Incarnate?
I think there is a carryover in skill from that because you find out what looks good in a more experimental way when you're drawing it yourself, I think. And so I think that can carry over. I think a lot of it comes down to learning the proper placement of things. So if we talk about other mistakes people make, and I'm putting that in air quotes, mistakes, big time, because it's their fantasy worlds. There are all sorts of reasons that things at a glance might not make sense to your viewers at first, like rivers that, rivers that split a lot. It's pretty rare for rivers to split. It happens in nature, but rivers that split a lot, I kind of look at that and I wonder, does this person not know that that's kind of rare? River bifurcation is a thing, but it's rare. Or other things like that where, they're not mistakes per se, but yeah, I feel like you can do better in Incarnate or Wonder Draft when you know those things as well. You kind of have to learn them quite a bit more when you're hand drawing your maps first.
Obviously, like you said, I mean, it's not entirely necessary because these are fantasy worlds, but I am curious, like, how did you learn, like, appropriate ways that rivers flow from one place on a continent to another, or how mountain ranges form, or etc.? Like, that is a completely different skill set from just, like, artistically drawing a map.
So there's actually a book on Drive Through RPG that I found immensely helpful for kind of learning some of the rules for rules in quotes for the way things generally go in nature, right?
Helpful
And
advice.
it's called what's that?
Helpful advice. Well, we'll call it
Yes,
helpful
exactly.
advice.
There you go. Helpful advice for geography that makes sense. And it's called A Magical Society Guide to Mapping. And it's very kind of poorly produced. It looks like it was photocopied in 1995. And so it's not like a real nice polished book, but it's got some really solid advice on the way things tend to form. And it does get into a little bit of like plate tectonics and things like that learning about can help, and can just help you make maps that are a little more believable. And then, of course, once you know the rules, you can break the rules, and you can break the rules because nature breaks the rules. And there are times when it's like, wow, here's a rare exception to the way things normally happen. And you can also break rules because magic and fantasy. And
Magic
this
is
is
cool.
formed this way because a dragon is sleeping beneath this mountain, or an ancient titan crushed this place, and that's why it is the way it is.
But when it comes to digital map making, there are so many tools out there. And obviously, we don't want to devolve into the semi-console wars of Dungeons and Dragons because what works for you works for you.
Yeah.
But I have to ask, like, what do you think is like the best of the best? What do you love using when you're creating maps digitally, or when you're recommending for people who want to create maps for their games?
So, I mean, I highly recommend people actually learn to hand draw them in a program like Photoshop, GIMP, Krita is another one. I think that's a great skill, and you can get these little digital drawing tablets for pretty inexpensive, like 30 to $100, I think. But if you're looking for an actual does it for you tool, I think there's some great ones out there too. Incarnate and Wonder Draft are both worth looking into. And I also think Dungeon Draft and Dungeon Fog, if you're looking for more encounter and kind of close up maps, those are great tools.
Yeah, I mean, Dungeon Fog and I don't know about Dungeon Draft, but I know Dungeon Fog creates a lot of maps for battle and for dungeons. How does your methodology change when you're creating a map that's a little bit more up close and meant for practical use during D&D combat?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a totally different realm, honestly. It's not even like I don't feel like any of my skills carry over necessarily. So when I started doing more encounter maps, I really had to learn how to illustrate a lot better. I feel like there was a higher bar in some ways for making something that like, oh, I can tell that is a forge in a blacksmith, or I can tell that that is a sewer grate there, or this actually looks like water flowing here. On a world map, it's like, yeah, you can tell that trees, mountains, rivers, sure. But on a battle map, on an encounter map, it's a higher skill set. So sometimes you can get around that by using symbols, and there are actually like keys out there if you just look up dungeon map symbols. And that can be a really great way to kind of communicate the basics without having to be a really good artist.
Awesome. I mean, that's a really good point. I'm going to start doing that. I never thought of that. I mean, when you are looking at the maps that you've created for dungeons or maps that you've created for your world, I am curious because I've always based sessions and encounters off of just maps that I found on the internet. Like I'm looking through Seiya and Peiku's map library and I'm like, yes, this is the next session. I mean, how does your thinking when prepping a session work through that? Do you create the session, then you work through the maps, or maps first, then the session, or does it alternate between the two?
Yeah, I think it alternates. But first of all, I love that what you just said, because I love that maps have the power to like inspire our adventures. It's not like they're just a thing off to the side, but no, they can be the spark that gets your imagination going in a direction. I think that's awesome. So yeah, I do a little bit of both for sure. I would say I usually am looking for a map to fit my session. Usually. And I usually have something very specific in mind. And if I can't find a map that fits my session, I will try to draw one. And sometimes that goes well and sometimes not.
I mean, I'm curious, how time consuming is it when you need to do that? Like already D&D, you gotta prep a while, and sometimes you gotta use that time sparingly. But I mean, how much of your time do you need to dedicate to drawing a map for a battle map or even like a world map?
Well, I mean, if I don't have time, then it is what it is. And I just have to get out like a fat black Sharpie and make some scribbles in 2 minutes. And that's fine. That's not the end of the world. I think that we have to be flexible as dungeon masters. And I think players have to expect that things are going to vary. If you're a dungeon master who uses, for example, physical terrain, which I've actually crafted some and I love it. It's awesome. And I bought some other stuff and I 3D printed some stuff. But for my players to expect that every game is like, no, you just can't do that. Like sometimes we're going to be improvising. It's going to be theater of the mind. Sometimes it's going to be something I scribble out on a piece of paper real quick. And that's fine. Don't put that pressure on yourself to need to like have some amazing map every time. But I think that there are a lot of maps out there nowadays, and that really does help. That I can, go to, there's tons of Patreons, there's tons of stuff on Reddit, there's all kinds of sources for quality maps so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Same Peiku's Patreon, man, like they have so many great maps that release like every 2 weeks. And I mean, I think that they don't specialize in creating maps that are like for mundane locations, like, oh, we're in a forest, or this is part of a city. It's stuff like a beached kraken with scaffolding all over it that will inspire an entire session. Like that kind of stuff is what I love about map making Patreons.
Yeah, absolutely. Those set piece moments, man. Those are so great. I did a map once that was like a shipwreck in a desert. And I think it was one of my patron requests. And it was just like, yeah, that's something I've never seen before. Let's make a shipwreck in a desert. How did this ship get here? What's the story there?
What are they going to find in there? What kind of monsters? Are they going to find like diebucks that possess the crew, and the party need to fight these weird squid demons and also the zombies of the crew? And does the ship like slowly sink into the desert? Is there a monster that's going to eat it? It's that kind of thought process is what I love about DMing, man.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What is one big piece of advice that you have for people who are just getting into it now? Like they're starting at their D&D games. Maybe they've been playing for a while and they just want to start creating their own maps, or maybe they want to just start playing D&D and start creating maps at the same time. What is your advice to people who want to create maps and they just don't know where to start?
I mean, I would say just pick up the pencil and start drawing weird shapes. Is the first place to start when you're building a world. You can go one of two ways. You can decide that I've got this world idea in mind, and I am going to try to illustrate it. Or you can just pick up the pencil and start illustrating, and let your world flow from the map. Kind of like we were talking about with encounter maps, how you can start with the encounter map, and that can inspire your session, or you can go vice versa. So I think just picking up the pencil and starting to scribble some funky shapes is a lot of fun, and then adding some mountains on there and some rivers. And as you do so, think about what sorts of adventures could take place. And that can really help guide you too. because then you start drawing cool things that will make for great sessions or great locations. So yeah, don't stress it and just go. I do have a wealth of YouTube videos on map drawing, so that's another place you could start as well.
That is the end of the episode, man. So we've only got one thing left to do. Nate, what have you got going on this week?
Well, I'm running a D&D game tomorrow. That is Monday, the 22nd, and I run that every other week, so that's a lot of fun. That's over on my live channel on WASD20 Live. So that's going on, and then yeah, I do a weekly stream for my patrons, and other than that, I'm a teacher, so I'm plenty busy. Yeah, lots going on.
Awesome, man. All right, if you guys enjoyed this episode of Roll for Insight and you want to let us know, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of our content, then please do subscribe to Crispy's Tavern and to WASD20 for more D&D stuff. And finally, if you want to leave your own tips or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment pen to parchment to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. We will both see you all next time. Farewell.